waiting room. Thank you so much for coming today. And thank you our speakers today, Senator Lovelett, Reps Lekanoff and Ramel. Thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation on important programs and topics of interest to businesses. I'm Victoria Compton from the San Juan County Economic Development Council. We're a very small nonprofit, and our mission is essentially to help businesses with whatever they need to succeed and to thrive. Right now, we're busier than we've ever been before, including the 2008 downturns, and we are helping businesses with whatever they need. If you own a business, go to sanjuansedc.org and check out some resources that we've got. You can also send us an email or give us a call, and we can help you out with whatever you need. And without much further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand the Zoom cam over to Washington State Representative Debra Lekanoff. Thank you, Debra, so much for joining us today, and I'll turn off my mic and let you go. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for putting together the meeting. I think it's so very important that we're hearing from one of our most beautiful places in Washington State that really relies on small business and economic development for our district. I want to just congratulate and thank my colleagues, Senator Lovelett and Representative Ramel. I think Senator Lovelett said it quite well last night on our last call that we shared when her and I were cooking dinner and doing Zoom calls at the same time for our families, that we've been on, Alex and Liz and I have been on calls almost every Saturday morning, a majority evenings and all days. And it's really focused on how do we make sure that we protect our 40th district, and how do we support our 40th district in the COVID crisis? How do we create economic plans that really fit the boots on the ground of local control? What do you need in your local communities and your small businesses that best fit how you're going to be able to return and how you're going to be able to sustain, not in the short term of this summer, but 2 years from now. We know that this impact is going to impact our state for many years to come, and that's the reality of it. We know San Juan's was already struggling with the economic support that they needed to be able to sustain their tourism. We know your infrastructure needs in water was already being impacted in your campgrounds. And we need to be able to take what was already being impacted and incorporate it into what needs to be done moving forward. I'm happy to talk about and take questions on what we're doing on the small business rollout. Many of you may know the governor and the Four Corners have created small task forces to be able to look at how do we open up our economies, how do we do it safely, how do we open them up, putting human health first. And with that, we're going to be talking in the next couple weeks with the governor's office on how we plan to implement that together as legislators. But how do I also make sure that I come back home and talk to entities and organizations such as yourselves to say, what does a slow roll open up of your economies look like, and what do we better need to be able to do that collectively together, and make sure that I'm walking side by side with Senator Lovelett and Representative Ramel as we develop this plan and these concepts together. But again, going back to local control, local conversations, because only you know what's best, that's going to work for you. So I'll pause there and turn it over to my colleagues.
Thank you so much, Representative Lekanoff. I would like to open it up now to Representative Alex Ramel, if he's there.
I am.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Victoria. Thank you for organizing this. Thanks, Debra, for getting us started. I have to say, it's a real pleasure to be able to work with colleagues where we're able to sort of divide and conquer on tasks and projects. Both Representative Lekanoff and Senator Lovelett and I, our teams are working together on a regular basis. And so we're trying to make sure there's no wrong door, and that we're, if you reach out to one of us, we'll make sure that questions and concerns that you have get addressed between the three of us. I will give just a couple of quick sort of policy notes, and really want to reserve as much time as possible for folks' questions. But just to kind of keep things moving. I think folks have a sense that the next steps statewide in terms of our response to COVID are going to be, as the governor has said, a dial, not a light switch. We're not going to hit May 4th and magically everybody comes out and everything goes back to normal. We're likely to see a steady reopening as the public health experts and the data tell us that we can do so safely. We've begun to see some industries and begin to increase operations. Things like last week we heard from the residential construction industry. This week the governor announced some increases in allowed outdoor recreation. My hope is that we continue to see public health data that suggests that more and more activity will be safe. And our caucus has been sending recommendations to the governor about sort of what the next logical steps in that dial likely are. I think some of those things, and again, these are recommendations, ultimately the governor's office will be the decision maker on these items. But I think opening up more retail, especially where it can be done with pre-order, curbside pickup or quick pickups, those kinds of things. I think we're likely to see optional medical treatments that had been put on hold increased as we have sufficient protective equipment. Home cleaning is likely another sector that we think will make sense. And I think we're very open to feedback about other industries and in particular how those businesses can be operated in a way that maintains social distancing and will maintain our public health. One other area that I think is critically important right now, we're hearing from local governments who are experiencing this in terms of not only increased responsibility for public health, but also reduced revenues, especially from sales tax. And so one of the things that's very much on my radar is that we need to be thinking about how to support our local governments going forward. Hopefully the federal government will come through with additional revenue in the next iteration of a stimulus package. We're told that plus or minus, that's likely to happen in early June. Hopefully local governments and state governments will have funds in there that will allow us to continue to maintain services without deep cuts. One thing though that in the meantime the state government can do and is thinking about is providing flexibility for dedicated funds to be used for other purposes. And so that's something that we're looking at right now. Happy to take lots of other questions, but we'll turn it over to Senator Lovelett.
Thank you so much. Senator Lovelett, if you could just let us know what you're hearing on the street and maybe some ideas for our businesses, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of the highlights I want to make sure to pass on to you guys is I'm sure you know that the governor has put an emergency $5 million that is specifically to support businesses that are 5 employees or less. Now, keeping in mind that that's the majority of our small businesses, that money is likely to run out fairly quickly. But I think that there's a sense of really needing to support and augment those businesses that have the least amount of employees, because they often get left out of different unemployment insurance and other things. So there is definitely a focus on wanting to take care of that. I'm not very good at toggling back and forth between information, but I wanted to make sure to share some things from the Senate side, the different work groups. I'm going to see if I can pull this up so I can look at it real quick, and then I can share that with you. So the Senate side, and I think that there are very similar corollaries in the House, we're looking at it from a number of different perspectives. One is just the small business and nonprofit side. One is kind of long-term economic recovery. One has to do with kind of thinking about infrastructure in terms of what we're going to need moving forward. For example, deployment of rural broadband if we have a continued school closure situation. But really with a sensitivity to understanding that in particular communities of color, and even more so our immigrant communities, are really suffering the most during this period of time. And it puts not only a human element that is in crisis mode that we really need to address very rapidly, but additionally puts a lot of pressures on our food supply. You guys probably heard that there was another outbreak in a plant in Washington, and that's happened around the country. So really trying to keep our eyes on the safety of our workers being foundational to the safety of our communities. There's obviously been some tremendous work in the governor's office around securing a supply chain for PPEs. And we're trying to broaden that to not only cover our frontline workers in a healthcare facility, but thinking about as people return to work, what sorts of needs they're going to have for protective equipment. Say someone who's coming in to clean a home, what kind of protective equipment are they going to need to have access to, when you consistently go into a hardware store and there aren't masks available. So really thinking about as people return to work, what kind of best management practices are in a retail setting. Does it mean, Representative Ramel mentioned on a different call, does it mean putting tape down on the floor? How are we going to know the best practices in order to keep people safe? Additionally, I think that there's a lot of focus on kind of the auxiliary issues that go with this, such as childcare, and what that does for people in our communities who need better access to healthcare on the whole. So I think that this has really laid bare a lot of inequities within not only our tax code, but our ability to respond responsibly, and what it looks like in terms of revenue moving forward. We know that we're going into either special or new session with somewhere between a $5 and $10 billion deficit because of the nature of being sales tax based. So that we have a moment in time right now to really address some of these things. My focus is primarily on figuring out how to use public works and housing as ways to stimulate our economy and our job force moving forward. So have been working, you have an incredible group of county commissioners out on the San Juans, and they are all incredibly dedicated and working every day. And I talk to them very regularly about, the specificities of what's going on in the San Juans versus what that looks like other places in the state, and realizing that a regionalized approach where we really take the information from what's happening on the ground and integrate that into something that makes sense in a place-based way. So with that, I'll leave it off and answer questions.
Thank you so much. Do we have questions? I think we should probably go with questions from the chat box, unless you want me to just open it up to everybody. I'll let you decide on what you think is best for that. Or maybe Amanda could pipe in and let me know. Okay, hang on a sec. There's questions coming in. I'm just gonna try and please forgive my lack of complete zoominess. Let me unmute Jamie Stevens from San Juan County Council. Jamie, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you for participating, all of you today. It's nice of you to take the time, because I know you've, just like you said, you've been packed all day for a month or more with these meetings. I was wondering two different things. One is, Alex mentioned flexibility with other funds. First of all, let me preface this. I think at this point in this crisis, there is a stunning lack of specificity or clarity on things. We're all thinking thoughtfully about things, but we're not really giving people some clear direction. So I'm wondering what Alex was talking about on flexibility with other funds. And I think our like in our case, our people are really good about this health crisis and keeping people safe, but they're a little slow. And I don't know what your experience is on guidelines and best practices and giving people solid. What I'd really like to do is be able to really be the messenger to our businesses about, as things loosen up, what are the best practices, and our citizens, what are best practices when you go into places. And right now it's been a little frustrating for me personally, because I don't know who's in charge of that, and doesn't seem like they're forthcoming from the governor's office. They're not necessarily forthcoming from our medical office, because they're more consumed with the concrete health aspects of this. So I'm wondering if any of you could comment on those. I guess Alex was the one who mentioned the flexibility, though.
Sure. I'll get started and let others jump in. In terms of the proposal for flexibility, what we're talking about right now is very much, I think it's pre-draft legislation that could be introduced. I think we could probably say when there is a special session. I don't have any information about when that would be, but I've been talking with Representative Paulette, who chairs the local government committee, about that kind of legislation. What we've discussed is a 1 year amount of flexibility for local governments to transfer money between funds that would otherwise be dedicated. And the one that everybody agrees on is the lodging tax. But I think the conversation is open to almost any dedicated fund, and providing, again, flexibility for local governments to be able to move money between those pools to balance a budget and keep people keep local governments from having to lay people off. With regards to best practices for local businesses, it was just announced yesterday, in Whatcom County. The Department of Health is coordinating with our Port Authority, which is our local economic development agency. They've partnered to provide companies with sort of a best practices and some customized individual assistance in how to properly maintain that social distancing on a individual basis for each company, and whatever the sort of logistics and operations of that company are. I'm happy to share that information and that contact if that's something that would make sense to replicate in San Juan.
It would be great. We're trying to find ways and things that can be backed up, or have some credibility, and that sounds like a good one. Thank you.
Yeah.
And keep in mind that we're here to get your ideas of how some of these things could work better, whether it's the paperwork side of things, the fund flexibility, but these are the kinds of things that you guys are going to know better because of the way it applies to you locally. So the level of specificity that you can send to us of how that might look is incredibly important. I saw a question there about LTAC flexibility. I mean, that's one that is very, very specific when that tax gets collected. But I'm not sure if that's something that we could say, on the local level, you guys could determine, these additional uses for LTAC money if we were able to change that legislatively. I mean, those are the kinds of things that would be helpful for us to know, because that tends to be a very robust fund.
So I was going to say, there's right now the House Democratic Caucus under Jerry Paulette, and I believe you might be part of that House Democratic Caucus, Alex, is they're looking at what is it that local governments need in flexibility to be able to implement their COVID action plans. And I agree with Senator Lovelett. If you all can start creating that framework at the city and county level and at your organization levels, and bring together proposals to Alex and Liz and I, we're your conduit to get it into these small task forces, and that goes on to the governor's office. Representative Paulette has been working with local government for a long time, and he gets and understands it. And I think he's really promoting, what do you need to get done? and a flexibility and a moving how you're spending your funding is available, then we should do that. There's conversations happening about local governments talking about your taxes that you're collecting. Are you going to be extending it similar to what the treasurers did on property tax? What do you see as doable to help your small businesses sustain? But we also know that those taxes are important to your local government to open up your doors every day. So there's a fine balance there that we want to be able to do as state legislators and say, what is it you need to be doing and how do we help you, and what legislative policies need to be changed in a short session? And if there's administrative changes, how do we help manage that conversation and support you in the agencies?
Thank you so much. We have a couple questions in the chat box, so I'll go ahead and read those out. Or actually, I'm going to unmute the people who've asked questions so that you can ask the question in case there's conversation that comes from that. So Lance, your question about opening industry by industries.
Okay. My follow-up was simply to, I think Jamie referenced the sort of lack of an apparent industry by industry or business best practices when we're reopening, and we've touched on that. And it sounds like Debra was maybe suggesting that it's best if we, on a local level, start to create some of those ourselves and offer them back to our representatives here as a way to get started on that.
So one of my concerns, Lance, is with the governors opening up to recreational, opening up hunting and fishing and parks, etc. People are going to be coming to the islands. We know it. People are going to be expanding and they're going to start exploring on day trips. And that's, the governor said, do that, but be smart. Bring your own food, bring your own water. Make sure your engagement in the local rural areas with others, you're using social distancing. Knowing how contentious this conversation has been out in the San Juans, Lance, it's almost time for your Chamber of Commerce to come together and maybe put out a press release that says, you know, if you're coming to our islands, we have lived here and we take care of these islands for you. Take care of us and respect us. You know, we are honoring that the governor's opened this up, but be respectful and get out as much information as possible that says, if you're going to come to our homelands, this is our guidelines that we ask you to follow. Please respect us. That might be some proactive work that we can help doing. And we might even be able to partner with the Washington State ferries to put this information on the ferry systems, you know, and even ask them to make a few gentle reminders. You're coming out to the San Juans, it's a rural area. Please be respectful and use your social distancing. And thank you, Governor, for doing this, but we don't want to have to shut down again if our numbers rise. Just some helpful thinking guidelines that might be helpful for you.
And I think there's going to have to be a cognizance of the people who either they think this is a hoax or they think it's gone too far or whatever it is, and what you guys think is appropriate in terms of reinforcing those norms and thinking about, you know, on an individual business level, if you see people coming in and or you know, you see those kinds of behaviors that you know is not what we're trying to do to keep this virus leveled out, you know, thinking internally, what does that look like for you as the person who's the proprietor?
Thank you. Okay, next question. Natalie Wilson wanted to know if there was an update on the Working Washington grants, the WWSBEG grants, and I can actually answer that unless one of you would like to. So those were small business grants that were from the Washington State Department of Commerce. The funds came from Strategic Reserve Funds, which is a fund that the governor has for special projects. They opened it up last month, or I guess this month, and all the applications are in. It was recently announced that an additional $5 million was going into the pool given by legislature. Thank you for that. The applications have not, we didn't open it up, or the Commerce didn't open it up to additional applicants. That additional funding went to the
You froze up, Victoria.
Anybody who's applied is already in the applicant pool, and Commerce has said that it will be later in May when they will have determined everybody's eligibility and looked at how the funding will sort out. And the next question was from Sarah Farish on Orcas. In regards to transferring funds from lodging tax, actually, Sarah, I'm just gonna unmute you so that you can ask the question in case something comes up.
Hi, everyone. This was in regards to what Alex had mentioned about possibly transferring those funds. And I was just curious what you were referring to. I haven't heard about that possibility. And obviously the lodging industry is suffering greatly. And I got an email this morning actually, which was really disturbing, which said that the San Juan Islands are considering not opening transient lodging all summer. So when I think about lodging tax and, you know, our business, I'm owner of the Outlook Inn and the New Leaf Cafe on Orcas. And when I think of what we've contributed, what we've generated in tax dollars for the county, and what we're facing now, I just want to hear more about how they're thinking about using those funds. And I sat on the lodging tax for the last 4 years, I believe. So it's something I'm familiar with. So it's really just, I'm here to gather information. Haven't been on any of these calls before, but the lodging industry is facing significant challenges. And while I, of course, want to protect everyone's health, I have many at-risk people in my own family. We're also fighting to survive. And our payroll last year was over $1 million. So we're significant contributors to this economy. And yeah, we're looking for help and guidance on how we're going to be able to weather this storm.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate the question. What I'm relaying is a conversation that hasn't reached a conclusion yet. What's been discussed is providing local governments additional flexibility in how they use that money. So my thinking is that it makes sense to give the local governments that money to be used in the general fund. And
Yeah.
so then it would be a local government by local government decision. When I proposed this idea, for example, to the mayor of Mount Vernon, she suggested that then they might want to use that money to promote local residents returning to local businesses to try and, so if we're not trying to increase tourism, how do we encourage residents to support those local businesses in this time? So that's one option. I'm not sure that's a decision that should be made at the state government level. Increased flexibility for money that's not being used right now while folks are being laid off, to me, makes sense.
Yeah.
With regards to the folks, or to the discussion about the sort of ongoing decision in San Juan County, I might turn it over to Jamie, or I saw Rick Hughes has joined the call as well to talk about that.
What are you talking about, closures, or I didn't know which part you wanted me to.
Yeah, I think Sarah was asking about whether that might, my understanding was it might be extended through May, but Sarah was talking about it potentially being longer than that.
Has there been discussion about that?
There's been discussion, no decisions have been made. We're going to be discussing it today at the Board of Health, and since I've got another council member on here, I don't know how that's going to go. I can say that our health director, Dr. James, when pressed, he was saying, you know, this can be an issue all summer long about reinfection. We currently have medical capacity to handle what's here. Should a bunch of tourists start coming and getting infected, we would not have the capacity, and that's where he's coming from. and saying it could go throughout the summer. As far as any closures, we have not made a decision, and neither has he. As I said earlier, I think we've been waiting for some direction. The governor's press conferences last week seemed to foreshadow an extension of the stay-home order, which has kind of been the basis for no lodging. And again, when pressed this week, when he was opening up recreation, again, he said he'd have an answer or have information, hopefully by the end of the week. Personally, I feel like people like you need to have a little, when I brought up again, clarity at the beginning. I believe that people like you need some clarity to, plan your retreat or however you want to say it, but you need more than, we'll think hard about it. But we haven't made any decision.
Yeah, well, and it's really hard with some of the federal program. We just received our PPP money yesterday, and figuring out how that money could be forgiven, if we're not going to be open, how we bring people back to be to help them financially. Yeah, we could use more guidance than we're getting, like you're saying, Jamie.
So I do want to dive in on the PPP program, if that's okay. So the PPP was designed to be somewhat of a replacement for unemployment and to keep people paid. They don't necessarily have to come back to work. So the clock starts ticking when you receive the funds, and then you've got 8 weeks to put your people on payroll, but they don't have to come in. You don't have to figure out what to do with them.
How we haven't received, my concern is that if we don't do things exactly right, this money won't be forgiven. And so that's where there's not enough clarity for me to just outlay these funds, which then have to be paid back in 2 years. I'd almost rather not spend the funds if I can't be clear. So maybe we can offline, if there's not other people that need that information here, I would love to have further conversation with you if you have more clarity, because it's confusing for us.
It is. It's very confusing. So I'll call you later today. Unless
Great. Thank you, Victoria.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, Vicki Lynn Herbert, you had a question. I'm going to unmute you. Vicki Lynn, are you there?
Yes. Hi. Hi, Victoria. Yes. The fortunate thing that has happened with my business, and this is just my second year, and I don't really have any funds, but the construction industry has opened up. And so I am going to have 2 sets of jobs that are prevailing wage where my workers are going to be on. And now with and I'm excited, these are good things. My concern is because everything has been delayed and it's all at the same time that these jobs are going to start, and it's a very robust payroll and certified payroll. So I have to, it's very serious that I have to pay their wages, which I would anyway. But my concern is because there hasn't been any work previously and now everything started at the same time, I do not have cash flow to keep 10 employees working and pay them. And my idle loan has not come. And then the other thing is that now with the regulations, which I'm all for all of this because I'm very concerned about people getting sick with the COVID, but now I need to have supervisors on the job to monitor everybody's symptoms and to make sure the PPE new regulations have come out on the job site, which actually increases costs. So I'm hopeful, but I'm also really nervous about this time. I don't have much confidence in getting really any financial help, so I'm kind of feeling like I need to go and just go get a loan to take care of myself. I don't know. I'm getting more nervous by the day. Usually we have a lot of work before now, and I already have more cash flow in the accounts, right, to be able to pay. And because nothing's been going on and now everybody's starting at the same time, the burden seems even bigger. I don't know that there's an answer. I guess I just needed to say it.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Vicki Lynn. You know, I'm going to call you later today to talk about some of the possibilities for you. We do have a job fair coming up, so you might be able to find some people through that route, but I will call you about other funding sources this afternoon.
Yeah, and I have plenty of employees, so I'm not worried about that.
Okay.
I have,
Great.
you know, 11 employees. It's funding their payrolls.
Right.
And
Okay.
not getting any help from the government.
Right.
Yeah, and I would say this is the biggest challenge that we face as legislators, is that the need so far outstrips the funds that are available. And so how do we use those constructively? How do we make sure people are being taken care of? I mean, these are kind of the overarching questions that we're really trying to dig in and answer. And I think that that's why, you know, in the House and in the Senate, we're breaking out into these different work groups to really dig in and figure out the best path forward, because we know we can't take care of all of the needs that are out there. So how do we prevent the most collateral damage possible? And I would say in the San Juans, you're in this particular, and this isn't going to be on the construction side of things necessarily, but you know, so many of your businesses are seasonal. So much of it depends on that summertime. And if you don't know whether or not you can book hotel rooms or book kayak tours or you know, whatever the circumstances, and there aren't clear guidelines. And it's really frustrating for me to have to keep telling people to be patient. And the information is coming because it is hard. But when you think about like just the sheer number of unemployment claims, I mean, their office went from handling 10,000 claims a week now in the 500,000 vicinity. I mean, they're just, all of our agencies are so swamped, and they're staffing up as quickly as possible to try to address these needs. But it's just, it's not going to be easy, and not every need is going to be taken care of. And so just figuring out, I think for a lot of you guys out there in the business community, what makes sense for you, regardless of the government intervention piece, is you know, that's some soul searching that I think everybody's going to have to do about what the future is of their business, knowing that there's a potential for the new normal to last for quite some time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to open up to another question. We've got Tracy. Tracy, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question.
It wasn't a question, it was a comment that we've already got a document out there from the building industry that has really good guidelines. Not downplaying what Vicki Lynn said about, you know, it means she has to hire more people. But as far as taking that document as a baseline to use for other industries for developing those guidelines, as to how do you keep your people safe and how do you keep your clients safe? You know, don't reinvent the wheel.
Thank you, Tracy. It looks like, Jamie, do you want to make your comment, or shall I just move on to the next question? Is Jamie there?
I'm here.
Okay.
Do I have a comment?
It was about state parks in San Juan County.
Oh, we were just talking about state parks. State parks currently are not part of the government in San Juan County, are not part of, they're not opening as of right now next week.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there, so Jamie, let me be clear. Is the state parks not opening as of next week because they're not underneath the governor's change in his proclamation, or are they not opening because they don't have the capacity to open it up to provide safe guidelines? And if they aren't going to open, Chamber of Commerce should get that out quite quickly, that you may hear things are open, but the San Juans is not. So you don't have an unexpected amount of people show up thinking they're going to San Juans for the day to go to the parks, and they're not. Now they're not going there, and they just show up walking through your guys' streets with no place to go.
I agree, but I don't know if it was in deference to the community's feelings about visitors right now, or what, but it was definitely called out in the governor's proclamation that they were not open. Chris Gadati, who's our regional manager of state parks, is going to participate in our Board of Health meeting today to discuss this issue. So, you know, it kind of caught me off guard because I had to leave the press conference before I figured out that we weren't open. And council discussed it yesterday, and we thought it best we'd discuss it at the Board of Health today, since the entire council sits on the Board of Health. And it, you know, some of this is all intertwined, as so many things are in this crisis, as we try to move to the new normal. But I just thought I'd make that clear, because you're right. We have to get another bit of clarity out there so everyone understands it.
Thanks, Jamie. Debra Hoskinson had a comment. I'm going to unmute you, Debra, if you want to say your comment. Otherwise, we can just move on to the next question.
Go ahead and move on. Sarah asked my question.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I'll let you mute yourself because now I can't find you in the list.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, Krista Campbell, you have a question about, or I guess this is a comment for L&I. That would be good to hear.
Yeah, it's just related to materials for guidelines. Victoria and I are working with Kyle Dodd at our county emergency response department, I guess, or task force, looking at restart and information and guidelines for industries or businesses. And he shared with us, because we were looking at developing some stuff, but there is a growing variety of documents, largely coming out of L&I. They've got a site where they're listing different guidelines for different industries, including retail and construction and healthcare and a variety of them. The one that's missing for us as a tourist destination is accommodations, running accommodations. But so that's where we're starting. I'll be looking at more of that this week. But there are materials that are coming out. Some of them are very repetitive in the standard. Everybody needs to offer sinks or a place to wash hands, and then different ways to control customer flow and whatnot with different businesses. But the material is coming. It's kind of daunting, like everything else. They're just throwing a whole lot of documents at you and a lot of information. But for San Juan County, I see it as we need some accommodation guidelines. I know some of our businesses out here are starting to develop their own to have that to propose to the county when that opens up. But the material is coming, but it's a lot to digest, I guess.
Yeah.
I'll put the link in the chat that I got.
That'd be great. Thank you, Krista. Lance, did you want to make your comment about Moran or no? Okay. Okay, everybody. Any other questions we have for our legislators? Looks like we don't, which let me open it up again to our legislators to make final comments if they'd like to. Otherwise,
I was just going to say thank you guys in closing. Thank you, Alex and Liz, for being partners here. We truly are splitting up our fortes, our focuses, and supporting one another and engaging on finding out what our next steps are that we need to do at the local level, also at the state level. And then our voices are also being shared at the congressional level to make sure that the next flow of COVID funding includes local and state government. You all might have recalled here that the governor allocated the $300 million as part of the CARE Act fund to go towards rural communities that didn't quite fit the phase 4 of the CARE Act. Please contact Lisa Brown's office with Department of Commerce, Jamie, and to the city of Friday Harbor, and look to see if you can qualify for some of those fundings. The governor is quite clear it isn't enough funding, but it's that first start. There are letters being signed on at the Senate level and at the House level, going back to the congressional parties to say in this next CARE Act, CARE 5, in economic recovery, our locals and city counties need that support, not just King County, but all of our communities around the nation, but specifically for Washington State. So continue to do the good work. To our Chamber of Commerce, I spoke to some of our restaurant owners up in Bellingham, and Alex, they're looking to create what their guidelines are of rolling open slowly and then they feel it to be very proactive to give that to the state legislature and to the governor's office. I again stress to San Juan County, a lot of your tourism and your dollars come from the food industry. If there's a way that you guys are able to roll out guidelines that you see how to implement them in your communities, I think the governor's office and agency, and I know we would happily take those forward. Again, you know what's important with boots on the ground, what works and what won't work. So with that, thank you for having this meeting here today. And thanks for being so patient as I jumped between two calls there for a few minutes. But the topics you spoke about today were the exact same topics that we talked about in our task force that was happening the same time. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to all of our legislators who came today. Thank you, Senator Lovelett and Representative Ramel. And thank you to all of you who came to the meeting today to talk with our legislators. And if you need anything, just give us a call or send us an email. We're at sanjuansedc.org. Without any further questions, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting a tiny bit early. And again, thank you all so much for coming today and for your for our legislators' stalwart support of San Juan County in Olympia. Thank you for that. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for organizing this. And please reach out with any comments, anything else we can do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and keep in mind, our office staff is incredible. They are here all the time. We do meet with the governor's office weekly. So if you need to pass up information, please do.
Well, and thank you for that, because in working with your staff, I wanted to give them a shout out too, because they've been really amazing. Thank you.
They're amazing.
They came up with the idea of having the multi-legislator meeting. So thanks to them. And they're on the call. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.